pyramid, you know. I'm not the first Hancock to have climbed it. And some of the 6 children that Santa and I have together have also climbed the Great Pyramid with us on a number of occasions. What a privilege. What a privilege. I feel so blessed that we've had that opportunity. That's me, of course, in the foreground. And that's my dad and my mum, and we're in India. My father was a surgeon. My mum wanted him to take up that job that he was offered in a teaching hospital. He graduated from Edinburgh University, but he was a Christian, very staunch Christian, and he decided to go in the missionary field, and he went as a doctor, as a surgeon, to the Christian Medical College in Vellore in South India. My parents had a rather tragic time. Before I was born in 1950. Before I was born, one other child was conceived, and that child was carried to term, but was born dead. And I was born, and obviously survived. And then there were 2 other siblings who were born in India. My sister Susan lived to a year and died, and my brother Jimmy lived to a year and died. That was the end of our Indian sojourn, and we came back to England. But India ingrained itself deeply in my heart during that period of my childhood, roughly from the age of 4 to the age of 8, 1954 to 1958. And I realize I'm so grateful to my parents for giving me that initiation into the world outside Britain at such an early point in my life. And there I am. The Christian Medical College was largely Americans. It's in a place called Vellore in Tamil Nadu, curiously enough, which is where Santa's family originally come from. Here I am with some American children, children of other doctors, and that's me. I do look a bit of an outsider, don't I? Standing on the edge. I guess I may have been 7 there, I'm not sure. And there I am at school. That's me. I hated rugby. I hated school. I failed, in those days, there was a thing called the 11 plus. I failed it. But I've been in India, I didn't understand the whole education system, I couldn't connect to it, and I failed my 11 plus really badly. And in those days, that meant you went to what was called the secondary modern and left school at the age of 15. So my parents decided that this was not right, and they stumped up for a private education, and I was sent to a place called Durham School, which was pure hell. It was a boarding school. It was horrific. It was awful. It was like something out of Dickens. Things that people would be sent to jail for now were routine there. I can't tell you the number of times I was seated outside the headmaster's study waiting to be beaten over the bare buttocks, with 6 strokes of the cane. Even other pupils were allowed to cane you 3 times with your pants on. And then rugby, you can see from my face that I'm not enjoying myself in the scrum there. But I went through school, and I did badly at school, and I didn't get enough A-levels to get into university. I just couldn't connect. And then I did 1 more year in a 6th form college. We lived in Sunderland in the northeast of England at that time. And in that 6th form college, I just did 1 subject, and that was sociology. It was a radical discipline at that time, and that's when I switched on. I loved it. I didn't have anybody telling me I had to do it. It was just up to me. And with that extra A-level, I had enough to scrape into university, the University of Durham. But not on an honours course, on a general arts course. Still didn't have enough. Met my girlfriend there, and my girlfriend was very competitive and a brilliant scholar, and she was on the honours track. Excuse me, I became very ambitious at that point. I have to be on the same track. So I worked my ass off that whole first year, and I got myself shifted over from general arts to honours in sociology, and eventually I graduated with first-class honours in sociology. And I met my headmaster on the bridge in Durham as I was walking back in my gown and cap, the one who used to beat me. the one who wrote in his reports, Hancock is a dreamer. He will never achieve anything. It is a waste of time keeping him in school. And he said, oh, Hancock, you've graduated. How did you do? I said, I got a first, and no thanks to you. Where I began to find myself at that school that I hated was in writing. That's when I began to realize that that nature had given me a certain gift for words and for writing. And I began to write initially poetry and songs. And I had one really good friend, Dennis Tweedy, and he was a great singer, and I played the guitar, and we wrote songs together. I played them at a sort of folk music society, and later on ended up actually doing open mic in pubs in Newcastle and Durham and Sunderland, which is a pretty tough place to do open mic. But I was just noticing that, I'm just trying to find it now. Yeah, oh, sorry. Look at that. November 1966, I wrote a song called Before the Ice Age. So weird. So what happens to us when we die? This came up. The soul hovering over the body, reluctantly parting with life. We see the same in an image from ancient Egypt here. The soul rising up from the body. Well, I had a near-death experience when I was 19 years old. I was still living with my parents then. They'd gone away for the weekend, and I had a party, and 300 people came to the party, and the house was completely trashed, and nobody helped me clear up when they went away, and I was left with the house and increasingly anxious, knowing that my parents were coming back. I went around the house tidying everything up, and I was in the kitchen, standing in water, puddles of water on the floor, washing dishes, and I got this strange compulsion to check that the refrigerator was properly plugged in. And without looking, I put my hand down there, the back of the plug had been broken off during the night. So with wet hands, standing in water, I touched the live terminals, and there was a huge bang, and I was thrown across the kitchen, hit the other wall, and I left my body. I was out of my body. I was looking down on myself. I didn't have the tunnel of light. I didn't have the relatives telling me it's not my time. I went pretty much straight back into my body. But for those few moments, I had a lesson that taught me whatever I am not only my body. There's something else to me than that. It was a very important experience for me. And I wrote this poem afterwards. For an instant, I was so near death that I could almost reach out and touch the stars. I was in that place where there is no time, hanging in heaven, or exiled in eternity. Had I wished, I could have pushed my hand out and up through the roof of the world and escaped forever from a lifetime of tomorrows. For 1,000,000 years that did not age the face of time, my life rested against stillness until all was still. And even the room became a universe where nothing was too big and a microcosm was where nothing was too small. Actually, that was 12th of May 1968, so I was 18, not 19. And there I am graduating from Durham, in my gown, and with my proud parents. 1973 that was. The years 1975 to 1976, I was privileged to spend in Somalia. My first wife was Somali, wonderful lady, and I have 2 children with her who are part of my large family with Santa now. And one of them, at least, is here today, my daughter Layla. I have to say that Somalia played an absolutely central and fundamental role in my life. I had extraordinary experiences there, and I became deeply attached to that country and to Africa. It's tragic what has happened to Somalia in the years since, but it was an amazing place in 1975 to 1976, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to spend that year there. 76 to 79, I was a journalist. I came back from Somalia and got a job on a radical campaigning magazine called The New Internationalist. And it suited me because I was always an outsider, and this was taking an outside view on things, and I felt I had something to contribute. And I was there from 76 to 79, and then 1981 to 1983, I was back in Africa. I was the East Africa correspondent for The Economist. Sounds highfalutin. Actually, I was a stringer. I was on a retainer of £50 a month, and I got paid lineage for my stories. Typical story in The Economist is 300 words, so you can imagine I didn't make very much money from it. But fortunately, I had great friends there. I was working out of the offices of camera pics, and this is when I came to write my first book. Now, of course, that's me with the hair on that slide. And that's my dear friend Duncan Willits, who's still with us. And here is just this fantastic, fabulous character, Mohammed Amin. Brilliant war photographer, cameraman, businessman, and hustler. And unfortunately, Mo was killed in 1996. I mean, when I met him, he had grenade shrapnel in his knee. He had his left arm blown off when the ammunition dump blew up in Addis Ababa in 1991. He carried on filming. He was the person who said to me, "Would you like to write a book?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, Graham, look, I've got this deal. I'm going to do a book called Journey Through Pakistan, and me and Duncan will photograph it, and we'd like you to write it." And I got to spend the next 6 months on the road in Pakistan. And through Mo's connections, I even had 2 weeks in helicopter in the Karakoram Mountains. What an incredible experience. I actually wrote my will at the time. I had believed that there was a thing called auto-gyration, that if a helicopter's engine stopped, it wouldn't sink like a stone, it would gradually settle to the ground. So I asked the pilot about this. He said, "Oh, it's complete rubbish. If the engine stops, we just hit the ground straight away." That's when I wrote my will. But to pass through the passes of the Karakoram Mountains, to see Rakaposhi towering, we were at 17,000 feet, which is above the ceiling for an Alouette, and at Rakaposhi at 26,000 feet up above is an amazing, magical experience. Mo was a huge influence on my life, and I miss him tragically. I think I didn't complete the story, but he was killed in 1996. Typical Mo way to go. He was on an Ethiopian Airlines flight from Addis Ababa to Nairobi, and hijackers took over the plane. They didn't actually have a bomb with them, but they claimed to have a bomb with them. And they told the pilot he had to fly to Australia. And the pilot said, "There's not enough fuel to fly to Australia." And they said, "You have to fly to Australia." So he went down towards the Comoro Islands, and that's where he ran out of fuel, and the plane hit the water over the Comoro Islands, and Mo and half of all the passengers were killed on that flight. Dear friend, I miss him deeply. So Journey Through Pakistan was that book. And the next book that I wrote was Ethiopia, the Challenge of Hunger in 1984, about the famine in Ethiopia at that time. And that's when I began to realize that foreign aid is not all the beautiful, wonderful thing that it's made out to be. And it's actually, in many ways, quite a negative thing. It's quite a patronizing thing. It disempowers those who need the aid, and it empowers those who don't. And in 1989, I wrote a critical book about foreign aid called Lords of Poverty, the power, prestige, and corruption of the international aid business. I had a lot of flack about that as well. And this is a sort of montage of all my books: Journey Through Pakistan, Under Ethiopian Skies, Ethiopia. I wrote a book about AIDS in 1985, The Silent African Art with Carol Beckwith and Angela Fisher, and then The Sign and the Seal was my first book of historical mystery, and this was an investigation into Ethiopia's claim to possess the lost Ark of the Covenant. That was also when I met Santa, because Santa was living in Ethiopia at that time, and that's when we became a couple. So here I am at the Tisisac Falls, the Blue Nile Falls. I've not been back to Ethiopia for some years, but I hear they've stopped the falls now in order to create a hydroelectric plant. I hope that's not true. It's such a beautiful place in the world. And here's Santa, my beloved partner in life, who we do everything together. And I just want to say thank you, Santa, for putting up with me all these years. So Santa was with me on the journey that we made. You see, to write The Sign and the Seal, I'd first come across the Ethiopian claim to possess the Ark of the Covenant in 1983 on regular visits I made to Ethiopia. But at that time, Axum was in the hands of the government, who I was on reasonable terms with. When I came to finish The Sign of the Seal, which was published in 1992, Axum was no longer in the hands of the government. Axum was in the hands of the Tigray People's Liberation Front. But there's no way I could finish that book without going to Axum. And the Tigray People's Liberation Front didn't really like me because I was quite closely associated with the Ethiopian government at that time. I'd even published a few books for them. But I went to the TPLF office in London, and I laid out the whole story, and I said, I need to get to Axum. Can you get me there? And they were amazing. They knew exactly who I was, and they said, don't worry, we'll take you. So Santa and I met up in Khartoum in the Sudan. They disguised Santa as an Ethiopian woman because she didn't have the necessary paperwork. She wasn't to speak when we passed military checkpoints. We drove right across the Sudan to Kassala. Then we crossed the border into Eritrea, which was a rebel province at that time, and then from Eritrea we went into Tigray. And this is just part of the journey that we made along the way. And finally we ended up in Axum, and I literally kissed the ground when we got back there. And I was able to follow up and complete my investigation into the story of the Ark of the Covenant. It's in a little chapel. Whatever it is, whether it's the Ark of the Covenant or not, I can't swear because I've never seen it, but the Ethiopian story is incredibly interesting, and the circumstantial evidence is compelling. I won't go into all the details here. It's in the Sign of the Seal. So part of that journey was climbing up to Debre Damo. Boy, I was athletic in those days. You know, as I was climbing, you see that monk up at the top who's got that rope around my waist. Halfway up, it turned out he'd fallen asleep, and the rope was looping down below me, so I had no safety net, and just carried on climbing. Fortunately, he woke up at the end and got me up to the top, which was a moment of great triumph, I have to say. Egypt has played a huge role in my life over many, many years. This is the Osario in Upper Egypt. It's another one of those megalithic structures that I believe has been misunderstood and misstated. Yes, it was used by the pharaohs. Yes, they put some inscriptions on it, but it predates vastly the Temple of Seti I, which stands nearby. And this is the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, which gives you some idea of the potential of the ancient Egyptians and what they could do. It was never finished because they found a fault in the stone, and it wasn't worth separating it out. There's the three great pyramids and the Nile Valley. You get a sense of the scale of the place. There's the Great Pyramid. That's the Great Sphinx over there, looking due east across the Nile Valley. The Great Sphinx is 270 feet long, you know, but it's just dwarfed in this panorama. Just a few more views of this magical, enchanted place. Sadly, I'm banned from Egypt. I can't go back there. It guts me, but because I say things that leading Egyptologists disagree with, the Egyptian government will no longer allow me access to that country. I feel like they've cut off my left arm. I hope one day to get back. Diving, also an important part of my life, as I showed in the earlier talk. Here I am on a dive boat. This is Shundaichi, who was the translator of Fingerprints of the Gods and of my later books in Japan, and who dived with me and Santa regularly around the Japanese islands. I showed you this slide earlier at Yonaguni, and here at Kerema. And here's a geologist called Wolf Wichman. Now, I took Wolf to Yonaguni, and he said, no, it's all natural. And then I took him to Kerema, and we went down there, and then when we came back up on the dive boat, he said, I can't claim that's natural. That is definitely man-made. And I said, don't you think it's odd that it's 30 meters underwater? And he said, yes, I definitely do. It was nice to have a bit of validation from a geologist. As I mentioned, there is much uninvestigated megalithic culture in Japan, worthy of further investigation. Here I am in the Pyramid of Unas, the earliest of the pyramids to bear the pyramid texts, 5th dynasty. And I'm showing this because the next photograph is of me and my dad in Jerusalem in 1999. By that point, my dad had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. typical doctor. He had all the symptoms of prostate cancer for years, and he completely ignored them. By the time he took them seriously, the cancer had escaped the gland and was all over his body. But he had 3 or 4 years left, and one of his great ambitions was to go to the Holy Land. And Santa and I took him there, and we had an amazing, amazing journey with him, and he finally passed away in 2003. 2017, August. I'd had the first seizure in May 2017 in New Mexico. Santa woke up in the night and I wasn't in bed beside her, and she found me lying on the floor outside the toilet with blood pouring out of my mouth, and I was thrashing and shaking. Ambulance was immediately called. I didn't lose consciousness for long. It was misdiagnosed as a transient ischemic attack, a sort of mini stroke. It wasn't. It was late onset epilepsy, and it hit me like a hammer blow in August 2017, where I had just the most massive seizure event. The docs were not able to stop me seizing. It took 2 ambulance crews even to get me out of the house. They took Santa aside and told her that, quite frankly, your husband is going to suffer serious brain damage, and possibly he's going to die. Their last option was to put me in an induced coma, which they did for 48 hours. And that's when Santa took this photograph, because she thought it might be the last photograph she ever took of me. And interestingly enough, although I'd had that near-death experience at the age of 18, I had no experience in this induced coma. It's just total darkness. So I guess I wasn't that near death. But just darkness. I remember nothing of it. I don't remember anything until I woke up and they're pulling the ventilator tube out of my throat, and I'm trying to say, I'm like, get this fucking thing out of there. Death is a great mystery. It's a great mystery of life. And we're all going to confront it, and we're all going to face it, and we're all going to have to deal with it in our own way. And believe me, as we get older, you see more and more of it around you, and old friends pass away, and we realize that it is part of life's journey, and we should not fear it. I don't fear it. I do fear pain. I'm terrified of pain. I don't fear death. I believe it's the beginning of the next great adventure. I wrote a piece about that after the epileptic attack, which is on my website. And the final picture, my stuff just keeps on getting older, t-shirt that the kids made for me. And there I am with Santa inside that pyramid. That is the bent pyramid at Dashur, also a 4th Dynasty pyramid, and we're up inside one of the narrow corridors and passageways inside it. I'm very grateful for the opportunities and chances that life has given me, for the experiences that have crossed my path, and I'm grateful again to all my readers who've made it possible for me to do what I do. Thank you very much indeed.